On sickness and health. The World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This definition, which has not been amended since 1948, is far-reaching and even radical. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given how contentious the subject is, it does omit the spiritual aspect of life, that fundamental human need for a meaningful context in which to base and evaluate experience. The importance of the spiritual dimension has been underlined by the Swiss psychiatrist C.G. Jung, who said that, of all his patients over the age of 40, there was not one whose problem was not essentially religious in nature. The word health comes from the same root as the word whole. What does it mean to be whole, to be fully alive in every part of our being? The Chinese have a lovely image of man moving between the forces of heaven and earth with the goal of remaining in harmony with both. That is one of the best models for health that I have come across. For me, health is an awareness, an affirmation, and an active participation in one's own destiny, with all the responsibility, pain and joy that entails. It is an expression of creative free will within the boundaries of natural and cosmic events, so that the individual participates in the fullest possible unfolding of self in the context of the given life circumstances. Health is not a static or passive state, it is a process of becoming. It means taking up the challenge of existence and meeting life honestly and openly within the constraints of the individual character and situation. Implicit in this attitude is the willingness of individuals to participate in their own destinies, so far as their state of consciousness allows, and a readiness which balances both flexibility and steadfastness to adapt to the demands of constantly changing circumstances. Astrology is one of the most accessible and reliable methods of pinpointing and analysing those factors that permeate inner and outer circumstances at any given moment, the individual's relationship to them, and the adjustments that need to be made to maintain a dynamic balance. Health is the result of the state of inner harmony that comes from cooperating with these forces. This view of health also includes the experience of disease and death, which are not necessarily enemies to be attacked and eliminated at all costs. Illness can be a teacher as well as a source of strength and growth. Larry Dossey, in Beyond Illness, gives a moving account of an elderly patient, John, who was dying in an intensive care unit of pneumonia, blood poisoning and renal failure. Dossey writes, "As I stood there, I was taken with a thought that made no sense at the time. This man is healthy, lying helplessly, affixed to various gadgets. This gentle, wise, alert man seemed beyond the distinctions of health and illness. John seemed to transcend the easy classifications of sick or well, better or worse. And he knew it too. He experienced this transcendence, radiating a kind of healthiness even when moribund. An hour later John died. I am convinced Elle in good health." The causes of disease health, viewed from the above perspective, can be seen as an ongoing conscious engagement with life, a yes saying to life, whatever the circumstances. But what about ill health? Our attitude and response to unwell clients are influenced, consciously or unconsciously, by what we believe are the origins of illness and what disease means for us. So it is important to be aware of where we are coming from. There are many theories about what causes disease, and a few of these are sketched out below. 1. Bad things happen. The bad luck school of medical thought sees the world as a randomly hostile place where accidents or germs strike or attack the good as well as the wicked. Illness in this worldview has no meaning or significance beyond the pain, anguish, and inconvenience it brings. Those who suffer are seen as innocent victims with little or no connectedness with, or responsibility for, or in, the misfortune apart from the fact that they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes they may even be deservedly or undeservedly elevated to saintly or heroic status. This random disconnected viewpoint does not sit well with the astrological perspective. 2. Faulty maintenance of body, mind, emotions and spirit needs certain conditions in which to flourish. If these are not met, ill health and or disturbed life conditions are the eventual results. Each level influences every other. An improvement or blockage at one level has a corresponding effect on the others, usually most marked in the level next to it in the hierarchy of body, emotions, mind, soul, spirit. The correspondences seem to be rather like the Escher waterfalls that cycle endlessly in defiance of the laws of gravity. Some people seem to get away with abusing the system for longer than others, but this is usually because they have inherited resilience and hardiness, or have naturally strong constitutions, as can be seen from their birth charts. At each level there must be correct input, throughput and output. This is most easily understood at the physical level. Just as it is inadvisable to try to run a car on treacle, an unsuitable diet makes for less than optimal functioning of the bodily processes. That leads to disturbances in metabolism and excretion, which in turn lead to various degrees of auto-intoxication, self-poisoning. Where this is continued long enough and severely enough, organic disease is the outcome. I once had a practice in the disease badlands of Britain. To put it flippantly, the main problem with many of my patients was chips, chocolate and chauvinism. Change the first two, the third, whether as victim or perpetrator, could take a bit longer, and the results were often dramatic. There was no magic involved. All they had done was stop poisoning themselves. The inability to understand, process and assimilate experience, and then to let go and excrete the waste, lies at the root of many psychological and psychiatric disorders. Inappropriate or powerful input at the level of the psyche and higher can lead to health problems if not dealt with. It is just as possible to suffer from faulty metabolism and constipation at these levels as it is to do so in the body. While it is not always as easy to control mental and emotional input as it is to regulate food taken into the body, it is possible to modify it a great deal. Much of the material churned out by the media is the psychological equivalent of junk food. With care and thought, a lot of it can be eliminated and more wholesome fare substituted. Indiscriminate and excessive ingestion of soap opera sentiment and tabloid sensationalism caters as little for sparkling psychological vigour as dining regularly on fast food does for the body's needs. Used sparingly as spices, a sprinkling of these experiences is fun, preserves our humanity, and is a good prophylactic against po-faced health piety. But as a basic diet, they can hardly be said to provide the raw materials for creativity, original thought, or authentic emotional response. 3. Avoidance tactics. Jung said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In the same way, at the physical level, ill health can be a way, mostly, though not always unconscious, of avoiding the emotional and existential suffering that accompanies life's growing pains. When the ego is confronted with evidence that it is not all-powerful, or where its old familiar and carefully defended identity is challenged, there can be great resistance to accepting the dawning of a new reality. For those with a poorly developed relationship with the authentic self, as opposed to the false, adapted self, it can be intensely painful to leave behind fantasies of power, glory and perfection, and settle for the knowledge that one is simply human. Rather than adjusting to new circumstances, a leap that often demands enormous emotional courage, a retreat into illness can be an attempt to climb back into the comfy bed of unawareness and pull the bedclothes over one's head. 4. A resting place. In our workaholic society, developing an illness can often seem the only socially acceptable way of claiming time out when the pressures of daily life become too much to bear. Acute conditions like the common cold and flu are important safety valves for an overburdened system. It's a pity that we can't just schedule an agreed amount of flexible downtime into our work contracts rather than having to pay for it via the discomfort of coughs, sniffles and sneezes, or worse. Other illnesses too can act as temporary stepping stones, giving a person time to reflect and to gather strength to deal with whatever difficulty or new situation needs to be faced and adjusted to. 5. Illness as initiation. At times, illness can be an initiation for the soul and play a major role in the process of an individual's unfolding. There may be developments that can only take place through experiencing the conditions of some particular ailment. Often people who have been subjected to the trials and sufferings of a life-threatening or debilitating disease express gratitude for the insights and maturity they have gained by having been forced to face that crisis. The Belgian Nobel Prize-winning physicist Ilya Prigogine has put forward the theory and mathematical proof of what he has called dissipative structures. This theory may have great relevance in explaining these shifts towards new levels of health and awareness. The body functions optimally within the limits of certain closely regulated conditions of temperature, pH, chemical composition, etc. These conditions are kept in a state of dynamic equilibrium by the process of homeostasis. This involves a network of feedback loops which, put simply, increases what is too little and decreases what is too much. Analogous processes are found in the structures of societies, civilizations, and other cohesive systems. In the evolutionary process, any entity, be it a body, psyche, society, is at certain times challenged by strong internal and external forces. When more and more stress is applied to the system, the central balance point which has, up until that time, formed the status quo becomes untenable, as the system is unable to summon enough force to resist the changes and maintain the norm. A homeostatic shift becomes inevitable, and the resultant change leads to a higher order of organization. This is what seems to happen to some people, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, through the experience of illness. 6. Repaying karmic debt. Many people believe that the origins of some cases of illness can be traced back to actions in previous lifetimes. As I know of no way of verifying whether or not this is literally true, I prefer to look at whether the karmic theory is helpful to the patient or not. Many years ago I met a man of great dignity in his late 80s. At his first Saturn return, a container of hot caustic soda exploded in his face, leaving him blind and horribly scarred. With a promising career now ended, he became bitter until he was told by someone that the accident was the karmic consequence of his cruelty to others in a former lifetime in ancient Egypt. This resonated with him and allowed him to bear his condition with equanimity. He consequently spent much of his long and fruitful life in spiritual development and helping others. The term "it's karmic" can, however, be applied sloppily in the same way that hard-pressed practitioners can resort to using the catch-all phrase of "it's a virus" to explain away puzzling ailments. Worse, it can be used to abdicate responsibility for poor lifestyle choices. I can't help it, it's karmic. 7. Illness as intelligence. At all levels of life there seems to be a purposeful intelligence at work. In the spiritual domain, the philosopher and priest Teilhard de Chardin put forward the teleological principle that everything is in motion, everything is raising itself, organizing itself in a single direction, which is that of the greatest consciousness. One of Jung's major contributions to psychology was to describe the individuation process, where the psyche moves towards ever-increasing wholeness, as distinct from perfection. At the body level, practitioners of natural medicine refer to the healing power of nature. Nature, as the body's innate intelligence, is always doing its best in any given circumstances, working for protection and survival and signaling warnings when something is wrong and needs to be attended to, whether this is an attitude or the lifestyle habits of a lifetime. In arthritis, for example, waste products are preferentially deposited in the joints where they may cause pain and mobility problems, but avoid obstruction or damage to the vital organs, which could have life-threatening consequences. 8. Social evolution. Some types of disease and instances of health breakdown can also be the spur for the development of social consciousness in society as a whole. Examples of this are AIDS, as well as the recent phenomenal increase in cases of autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. In this category, I would include hereditary and congenital conditions, as the implications of these go far beyond the individual's own lifetime to family and cultural inheritance. 9. Illness as self-expression. Illness can be seen as a creative expression of the personality. Just as heaven and earth mirror each other, as above so below, outer form reflects inner conditions. In other words, our bodies are formed and shaped by our beliefs, thoughts, words and deeds. Architecture has been described as frozen music, and similarly our diseases and disorders are the embodiment of how we are or have been, conducting the music of our personalities. The creation of health and illness. At birth, our chart configurations are pure potential, but as we come into contact with the world through our environment, family, culture and schools, these configurations, or sub-personalities as they are sometimes called, start to flesh themselves out and take on lives of their own. I believe it is the complex charge attached to certain parts of the personality, made up of self-image, thoughts, feelings and behaviors, that correspond to the personal profile of symptoms and illnesses that each of us as an individual is prone to manifesting. A particular symptom or illness can be the precise manifestation of certain beliefs, ideas, emotions and behaviors that are operating often just below the level of consciousness, the potential for certain physical manifestations to show up in the natal chart, which can then be used to decipher the meaning of an illness, as well as the physiological processes associated with it. Every chart factor and configuration can be examined using the following questions. What is the self-image around this theme? What are the thoughts and assumptions about it? What emotional charge is accumulated around it? What behavior results because of these recurrent beliefs, thoughts and feelings? What are its physical manifestations? Watch your words. Each expression of illness gives heavy hints about its own meaning, causes and cures, sometimes in a wickedly witty way as puns, and it pays to take the time and trouble to decipher the clues. Time and again, a client and I have burst out laughing when the blatantly obvious message the body is trying to deliver finally hits home. The subconscious mind is quite literal. Anything that is repeated often enough in feelings, thoughts or words is automatically made manifest sooner or later. Here are a few expressions used by patients to describe themselves or people in their lives, and which have manifested as physical symptoms. A young man with constant nausea who said he couldn't stomach his work anymore. A woman with bladder irritation, cystitis, who was pissed off with her husband. A woman who reported that her husband was getting on her tits had a benign pituitary tumour that caused her breasts to secrete milk. Someone who can't bear all this extra work presented with a frozen shoulder. A woman who refused to take notice of her partner's emotional cruelty and infidelity lost her sense of smell and developed poor short-term memory. The frantically busy person who contracted Still's disease. and the large lady with a pain in the left buttock who described her emotional state as being left behind, as a patient with diarrhea described it as something that runs in the family. There's a man with Parkinson's disease who had been saying for years, "I'm shaking with frustration." The biomedical model of health. In the West, there are currently two broad ways of viewing healthcare, the biomedical and the holistic models. The set of assumptions on which orthodox medicine is based has been called the biomedical model. This is composed of two sets of ideas, those of Descartes, 1596 to 1650, and the concept of reductionism. Descartes was a brilliant mathematician and philosopher whose view was that there is nothing included in the concept of the body that belongs to the mind, and nothing in that of the mind that belongs to the body. He saw the body in purely mechanical terms, rather like a clockwork model. When the mechanism is functioning well, the person is healthy. Disease means that there is something wrong with the machine. This can be put right by tinkering with the appropriate cogwheels, or, if that does not work, cutting off the offending piece, throwing it away and fitting a spare part. Reductionism suggests that all phenomena, no matter how complex, ultimately arise from one primary cause. Taken to its logical conclusion, this means that for every disease, no matter who has it, there is one cause and therefore one correct way of dealing with it. In the world of the senses, it is impossible to do two things at once with any degree of efficiency, so by narrowing the focus of attention, more rapid progress can often be made, whether it be in the arts, sciences, or simply the concerns of everyday life. The wider the focus, the more difficult it is to investigate matters in depth. However, we also need a broad overview to prevent the development of tunnel vision and to see how the subject under the microscope fits into the larger whole. Limiting research to the fundamental ideas of Cartesian philosophy and reductionism has produced a rich harvest of knowledge about the mechanical workings of the human body and many factors associated with disease. It has produced great blessings in the form of antibiotics, anesthetics, and sophisticated surgery, to name but a few. However, all models have a limited usefulness, for they are in reality artificial frameworks for examining the truth, and not the truth itself. The biomedical model is now nudging the limits of its usefulness as the number of facts that it cannot explain increases. It has led to the notion that patients participate very little in their states of health, and that disease is a visitation of bad luck from the outside, in the form of, for example, viruses, which cause a breakdown in the good working order of the body. There is a parallel notion that claims that unless tests show that there is a dysfunctional foreign body present, the patient is not ill. In other words, the limits of medical science are equated with the limits of the truth, which, to put it at its most charitable, shows a lack of insight. There is also an unspoken assumption, an agreement between many patients and their doctors, that the patient has the right to demand that the doctor make them well. In return, the patient hands over all the power and responsibility for their own body to the doctor. It is becoming increasingly clear, however, with the escalating costs and crises in healthcare, as well as an actual decline in real health, that this and other assumptions based on the biomedical model are no longer valid. The holistic model of health. Many doctors and health professionals in the fields of both orthodox and alternative medicine have realized this, and are actively working on new concepts of healthcare which are not machine-oriented and which put the whole person at the center of the treatment. Whereas previously patients who asked questions were labeled difficult and regarded as nuisances to be shaken off as quickly as possible, in recent years the notion of expert patients who take an active role in managing their own health has been increasingly accepted and welcomed. One of the foremost pioneers of the new approach is Lawrence Lashan, who has developed a model of holistic health based on the following principles. 1. A person exists on many levels, each of which is of equal importance. 2. The patient has systems of self-repairs which are crucial to the prevention and treatment of that particular person's illness. 3. Individuals must be actively and knowledgeably involved in their own treatment. 4. Each person is unique and needs to be treated as such. In Lashan's view, a disease, from the viewpoint of holistic medicine, is a sign that something is wrong with your life. Your task is to find out what that something is and to take appropriate action. There are several reasons why a person may be out of harmony with the flow of creation. The most common is faulty maintenance at one or more levels, as has been touched on previously. Another is that the individual is in the vulnerable and usually painful process of moving from one steady state of development to another. At the highest level, the esoteric teachings of many of the world's great religions speak of certain souls consciously taking on the burden of suffering and illness to lessen the load for others. In treating a patient, before probing into the higher causes, it is usually best to work up the ladder of priorities and likelihood from the body and emotions heavenwards. For example, the first thing to do when a person has been run over is to move the vehicle off the patient, not to call a priest. Similarly, where a patient is malnourished, the immediate task is to attend to the diet, leaving exploration of the relationship with mother till an appropriate later date. An astrological model of health. The holistic health model dovetails with the concepts of modern astrology. That the client is unique is self-evident from the natal chart. The ability to mirror back this uniqueness to the client is one of the major strengths of astrology, and is, in many cases, therapeutic in itself. Identification of the problem and then of the options available are the first steps in healing. The natal chart gives a detailed map of the inner territory, which is both a concrete starting point and an invaluable tool for the journey towards wholeness. The natal chart may be looked at in many different ways. The most common approach nowadays is the psychological one, and a competent astrologer can make a substantial contribution by helping clients understand the makeup and dynamics of their own psyches. Some astrologers specialize in the spiritual approach, but it is unusual, indeed difficult, for a reading of any depth not to touch on this aspect. Spiritual does not refer to religious in the sense of organized worship, but rather goes back to its original meaning. The word religion comes from the Latin re, meaning again or back, and ligere, to bind or connect. Religious or spiritual here refers to the self in the context of the whole, in other words, the relationship between the individual's sense of meaning and purpose and that of the cosmos. Astrology can show any client who is willing and able to look their own particular connection with the universe and how it can be linked to their health. However, one of the great dangers in recognizing the interrelationship between patients and their own illness can be in presenting these insights to the person in such a way that it amounts to what could be described as karmic terrorism. While it is true that a person has responsibility towards all that happens in their life, whether it is a disease or anything else, it does not imply that they are responsible for it. It is insensitive, to say the least, to add to a patient's burdens, which may already be considerable, by insinuating that they are to blame and that it is all their own fault anyway. The patient's involvement in the healing process is intrinsic to the practice of astrology. Each problem carries within it the seeds of its own resolution, and astrology can pinpoint and elucidate the problem or problems that need to be addressed. Each chart factor has the potential for positive and negative manifestations. It is only with the awareness and conscious cooperation of the client that a shift towards the more positive dynamic can come about. Astrology and medicine. Hippocrates, supposedly, wrote that a physician without a knowledge of astrology had better call himself a fool rather than a physician, and Culpeper, definitely, stated that physic without astrology is like a lamp without oil. Now, these are pretty strong statements. What is it that astrology can offer to medicine that makes it so indispensable? Astrology can be useful in providing insights concerning the diagnosis, prognosis, and most effective treatment for individuals and their illnesses. It is in the ability to address the specific individual case that astrology excels. The experimental data that provide the guidelines for orthodox medical assessment and treatment are based mainly on statistical averages. That gives us the average man or woman, who of course does not exist. Almost every assessment and treatment will therefore be only approximately right if that patient falls within the peak of the average, and potentially disastrously wrong if they happen to be one of the few percent at the tail ends of the frequency curves. Sir William Osler, 1849 to 1919, a Canadian doctor who was highly influential in his time, once said that it was more important to know what sort of patient has the disease than to know what sort of disease the patient has. Thoughtful practitioners ponder the question, why does this particular person have this particular illness at this particular time? These are issues that astrology is well equipped to tackle. The natal chart can certainly demonstrate what sort of person has the disease, and transits and progressions show why, and why at this time. The birth chart will reveal too the likely reaction of the individual to challenge and stress, since unresolved stress seems to have a major part to play in the etiology, causation of disease. This knowledge is of paramount importance. Examining transits to the natal chart around the time the disease started will pinpoint the underlying psychological patterns associated with the problem, as well as possible environmental and lifestyle characteristics that may be contributory factors. Astrology is one of the finest and most advanced tools for understanding the individual psyche. This has come about through the work of skilled astrologers such as Liz Green, who also have a high degree of proficiency and scholarship in the theory and practice of psychology and psychotherapy. A great deal of work needs to be done by practicing astrologers who are also medically fluent, whether it be in the Western, Ayurvedic, Tibetan or Chinese system, before medical astrology can reach the same degree of sophistication as psychological astrology. However, there are many correlates that have been pieced together over the years. Chapters 3 and 4 contain information that by tradition and or experience has been shown to provide valuable clues. The Decumbiture chart is a specialized form of horary astrology that has been adapted for medical use It is a useful tool to help evaluate what is going on at any one moment in the patient's life, and in particular the state of health. It is especially valuable as it shows the practitioner's involvement in the treatment, a factor overlooked at one's peril, as well as the types of remedies to be given. Chapter 6 deals with this in some detail. A prognosis can be made by assessing the personality of the individual who has the illness and how they are likely to handle challenges and the need to adapt. Much information can also be gained from the timing of the transits and progressions, and from the decumbiture chart. In addition, the constitutional makeup will also determine which therapeutic measures are likely to be the most effective. The practitioner can then assess the factors at work and choose whether to oppose, assist, or balance those processes. Chapters 7 and 9 on psychological therapies and materia medica provide further information on this subject. Astrology's potential role in medicine. Astrology can throw light on the dynamics of the personality of an individual. Dynamics means any driving force instrumental in growth or change. The dynamics of a person's living body, vulnerabilities and likely immunities to certain diseases, and psychological patterns that correspond to these vulnerabilities and immunities. How an individual can keep well and prevent disease, and why this particular person is suffering from this particular disease at this particular time, and when the disease is likely to flare up, worsen, or improve. Some differential diagnoses of a potential or actual condition. What needs to be addressed at all levels? What options for unfolding that are open to the person at that time? Astrology can give a diagnosis in terms of underlying astrological dynamics. I'll suggest approaches which might best alleviate or cure the trouble, tailor-made for that individual, how to treat the patient who has the disease and not the disease that has the patient, and indicate the best times to administer medicines for successful treatment. Chapter summary: Health and disease. The World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, but omits the spiritual aspect. The author suggests that health is an awareness, affirmation, and active participation in one's own destiny, and involves a willingness to adapt to changing circumstances. Theories about the causes of disease include bad luck, faulty maintenance of body and mind, avoidance tactics, illness as a resting place, illness as initiation, repaying karmic debt. Models of health. Biomedical model views the body as a machine, and disease is seen as a breakdown in the machine that can be fixed through medical intervention. Holistic model recognizes the individual as a whole, comprising physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects, and emphasizes the importance of considering these aspects in healthcare. Astrological model recognizes the individual's unique connection to the universe and their role in creating their own health and illness. Key concepts. Illness can be a teacher, a source of strength and growth, and an opportunity for spiritual development. The concept of dissipative structures suggests that illness can be a catalyst for transformation and growth. The natal chart provides a detailed map of the individual's inner territory, highlighting their strengths, weaknesses, and potential health vulnerabilities. Astrology can provide insights into an individual's personality, vulnerabilities, and potential health risks, and offer guidance on prevention and treatment strategies. Questions and answers. 1. What is the definition of health according to the World Health Organization? Answer: a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. 2. What is the author's perspective on health? Answer: health is an awareness, affirmation, and active participation in one's own destiny, and involves a willingness to adapt to changing circumstances. 3. What are some causes of disease according to the text? Answer: bad luck, faulty maintenance of body and mind, avoidance tactics, illness as a resting place, illness as initiation, and repaying karmic debt. 4. What is the significance of the story about the man who was blinded and scarred in an accident? Answer: the story illustrates how the concept of karma can help individuals find meaning and purpose in their suffering. 5. What is the author's view on the concept of karma? Answer: the author suggests that karma can be a helpful concept in understanding illness, but warns against using it to abdicate responsibility for one's choices. Additional questions. 1. How does the author relate the concept of health to the word whole? Answer: the author notes that the word health comes from the same root as the word whole, suggesting that health involves being whole and fully alive in every part of one's being. 2. What is the significance of the Chinese image of man moving between the forces of heaven and earth? Answer: the image represents the goal of remaining in harmony with both heaven and earth, and serves as a model for health. 3. What is the author's perspective on illness? Answer: The author suggests that illness can be a teacher, a source of strength and growth, and an opportunity for spiritual development.